Good morning, everyone. My name's Aaron. I'm one of our pastors here. Thank you for joining us at Bay Area Community Church in Annapolis here in the auditorium or in the chapel online or in Odenton. As always, we love you guys. Thank you for joining us and being part of the church family here. I don't know if you have ever had a time like this at work, but this has, I think, probably happened to all of us either at school or at work at some point, where whoever's in charge, rolls out a new rule or a new policy about a very specific thing. New rule, new policy, and they'll say, okay, everybody, here's the new thing, here's the new policy, but just so you know, this isn't about anyone in particular, okay? It wasn't brought on by any specific situation. It's just something we needed to get in writing, for a little while, okay? Quick tip, if anyone ever says that, there's definitely a reason, okay? There's a reason that they came up with this rule. If the new rule is like corporate funds cannot be used for gambling, and the sales team just got back from Vegas, I think that's related, okay? I wasn't going to go out on a limb, okay? It's a way of calling somebody out without calling them out, right? Okay, and pro tip, if the policy significantly affects you and doesn't seem to bother anyone else, you're the reason the policy was written, okay? Just so you know. But, okay, I only bring that up to say the situation surrounding the teaching of Jesus that we're going to be looking at today is actually very similar to that. Jesus gives a lesson that is for sure directed right at somebody without technically being directed at him. And I actually think it's pretty hilarious. I enjoyed reading it, kind of like snickering at the guy, like, you're getting called out. Until I realized, oh, shoot, I think I'm just like that guy. So I felt a little called out, just like he was. And I wonder if maybe you'll feel like you are a little called out by this story as well. So let's check it out together. If you would join me, please, in Luke chapter 12. However you access the scriptures will be in Luke chapter 12. And as a church for this ministry year, our emphasis, you might get tired of me saying this if you're around a lot, our emphasis is that we are becoming more like Jesus. But in order to become more like Jesus, you have to know what Jesus was like. And so we are going through the Gospel of Luke, which was written by a physician in the first century whose name was Luke. And he produced this biography for his wealthy patron, Theophilus, who was likely skeptical of the claims of Jesus, and he wanted certainty. And so Luke went on a research mission in order to produce a document that could provide him with certainty about the claims of Jesus and his life. So we want to learn a lot about Jesus through Luke so that we can become more like him. But in this part of the series, we are not trying to mimic Jesus. We want to be molded by him. Instead of just trying to copy his life, we're trying to learn from his teaching so that his words become our main influence in how we think about the world. And in the section that we're going to look at today, Jesus is teaching, and he's on a roll. Okay, he is just going for it. There's a huge crowd gathered. The kids would probably say that this whole talk has been fire. They might use like a fire emoji even. Okay, if I'm being honest, I don't actually know what the kids are saying, and I think that's pretty obvious right now in this moment. I don't know what the cool kids are saying, but Jesus is not holding back, okay? So he's really going in, and let me give you some quick examples. Luke chapter 12, verses 8 and 9. Here's what he's saying. I tell you, everyone who acknowledges me before men, the Son of Man will also acknowledge before the angels of God. But the one who denies me before men will be denied before the angels of God. Wow, okay. He's not playing. That seems pretty intense. He continues on in the next verse, verse 10. And everyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven. But the one who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. That's really intense. Okay, I'm not even sure what to say about that. I'm glad that's not the passage I'm preaching. Let's look at verse 11 and 12. He continues on. And when they bring you before the synagogues and the rulers and the authorities, don't be anxious about how you should defend yourself or what you should say, for the Holy Spirit will teach you in that very hour what you ought to say. Honestly, all of this is heavy. I mean, it sounds cool that the Holy Spirit's going to help me in the moment, but why am I being dragged in front of the authorities in the first place? I don't know about you, but I have questions as I'm listening to this. In fact, let me ask you, take a second and just reread that, what you see, verse 11 and 12. If you were going to interrupt Jesus' teaching and raise your hand and say hey, I hate to interrupt your flow, but I just have a couple things I would like to get clarified, okay? If you were going to throw your hand up real quick and ask a question based on verse 11 and 12, you don't actually have to answer out loud right now, but what question would you throw out, okay? As you just read that, you're okay, a few things come to mind there, sort of a lot. What burning question might seem important enough to throw up your hand? Let me ask you, did any of you think of this question from verse 13, the next verse? Someone in the crowd said, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." No, nobody thought of that? Weird. That's very strange. This is the next verse. That's what this guy came up with. That's what's on his mind. That seems, I don't know, to me that seems kind of rude, right? A little self-centered. Jesus probably worked hard on that sermon, and here's this guy just like, hey, with the inheritance and stuff. It's like, it's a little greedy, right? Jesus agrees, for the record, okay? And this guy blows up the moment for all of his own purposes, and Jesus just goes with it, okay? He chooses to pivot and deliver a very powerful truth. Okay, this interjection from the crowd becomes the context for a teaching from Jesus about money and our relationship to it. Okay, but it's not going to be like a nuts and bolts kind of teaching. He's not going to talk about the benefits of a Roth IRA, or he's not going to talk about like a debt-to-income ratio. That's not what this is about, okay? He wants to get to fundamental questions. Because here's the thing. Anytime we're talking about money, we are circling around some really big questions about the good life. When you're talking about money, you're talking about the good life. The questions specifically are, what is it? What is the good life? And how do I get it? Anytime you're talking about money, you're talking about what is the good life and how do I get it? And this guy, we're going to call him Crowd Guy. Okay, Crowd Guy absolutely reveals his worldview in the statement that he makes. His answer to these vital questions about the good life are made obvious by the way he chooses to handle this moment. And Jesus is not going to miss the opportunity to warn him and his disciples and the crowd that's gathered and us here today about the dangerous answers that exist in our world to the question of what is the good life and how do I get it. He's going to warn us against those things because if we get the wrong answers, it can derail us spiritually. Okay, so what we're going to see in this interaction really is a showdown between greed and Jesus. It's a showdown between greed and Jesus on these questions. He pivots from your regularly scheduled programming and goes toe-to-toe with our most fundamental assumptions about money. He's going to show us the better way of Jesus. So let's jump in. We're going to look again at what Crowd Guy says in verse 13, and we'll break it down a little bit. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Hey, teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Okay, here we go. First of all, this is not a question, right? This is a demand. Whether or not this dude even has a legit grievance here, he's not looking for wise advice from a wise person in a difficult situation. The guy's looking for a rubber stamp, right? He wants this teacher who has a measure of cultural clout, he wants him to declare me the winner in civil court so that he can have more money, right? He just blurts this out. Jesus is talking like big stuff theologically, and this guy's like, I can't wait anymore. I came all this way. I'm going to get my question out there, right? So we're getting selfish vibes from the very moment we first interact with Crowd Guy. But we got to talk about the cultural nuance a little bit here. No matter what period of history you're living in, inheritance stuff can be a little tricky, right? And it's true in their culture as well. But in their culture, the oldest son always received a double portion of the inheritance. So all the sons would receive a portion, but the oldest one would receive twice as much. Now, we don't know how many other siblings this guy has. I feel bad for his sisters if he has any, because not only are they not going to be culturally written into whatever's happening in the inheritance, this wonderful brother of theirs doesn't seem to be like advocating for them either, okay? So I'm definitely feeling bad for them. But regardless, what seems most likely in this situation is just that he wants more inheritance than he is in line to get. Okay? And so even though his big brother is very likely standing there with him, this guy just blurts out what he wants to get. Okay? In fact, he and his brother might literally have come to Jesus for the purpose of speaking to him together, likely when he was done teaching, because it wasn't super unusual for a rabbi to kind of be a mediator in the midst of a dispute. So they might have come to discuss this with him. But this guy's like, no, I'm going to settle outside of court. Like, I'm going to get my argument in first. Now, it's possible, I guess, that someone would behave this way because they were being treated very unfairly. So maybe that's what's happening. But based on, first of all, how this guy is acting, and then second of all, how Jesus responds, I think we're pretty safe to view this guy negatively. Okay, so like what kind of guy is Crowd Guy? Here's his profile. If he were on a dating app that was honest, here's what his profile would say on this dating app, okay? Here's his initial fear, okay? Let's just think about what he's like. His fear is of the future. His fear is of the future. Now, I'll admit that's understandable. I'm sympathetic to that, especially if he's financially unsure. I get why you might be scared of the future, of course. His desire is for security. Again, that's reasonable. All of us want to be able to look into the future and think things are going to go decently. But here's the problem. His attitude is selfish. He's self-consumed enough with his own problems that he interrupts, not with a question, that would have been fine. He's blurting a demand about an unrelated personal problem. He's selfish. And his solution to this problem, that the only one he can think of, is money. In the panic and the desperation that he feels about his own future, he sees money as the solution no matter what it takes. And so his approach is ruthless. He wants the money. No matter how fair his claim to the money is, no matter what impact it might have on any of his other siblings, he cuts the line and demands, Jesus, get me what's coming to me. Needless to say, this is not a great look, okay? And Jesus can tell what's going on, of course. And so how does he respond in verse 14? Jesus said to him, man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you? Which I added the emphasis. I get that we don't have his tone of voice. If you have a recording of this section, I'd love to hear it, by the way. But in short, Jesus just says, no. He flat refuses to help this guy. He's like, look, who died and made me your estate attorney? No, I'm not helping you. Back off. And then this happens in verse 14. There's this little add-on, okay? He says, no, but then he said, to them. He said to them. Okay, so after intentionally putting this guy in his place, he speaks to him, and then he says to them. He turns to the whole crowd and states a new general policy that all of you should live by. He states to them, hey, everyone, just random thought. Take care, be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Which is like a first century takedown, okay? Ouch. This is the moment where we have a new policy we'd like to read out. Very clearly about one person. This had to be pretty embarrassing for Crowd Guy, okay? Because he has randomly brought up his money issues and Jesus is shutting him down, then turns to the crowd and is like, you know what's bad? Greed. It's real bad, guys. Life is more important than stuff, right? You know? But what Jesus is saying, I'm going to argue, is the opening statement from Jesus against the worldview of greed. We have a showdown between greed and Jesus. And when he says, hey, life does not consist in the abundance of possessions, what is going on there is his opening statement. He's specifically identifying, here's what greed says is the good life, and that's wrong. Greed says the good life is to be rich in stuff. The good life, according to greed, is to be rich in stuff. He who dies with the most toys wins. And Jesus says, no, that's wrong. More money, more problems, okay? Greed is totally wrong about this issue. There's more to life than getting more stuff. But we have to notice something, and I think this is key for us in particular. He doesn't just say that greed is wrong. He also issues a warning. He said to them, take care and be on your guard. Take care and be on your guard. That's redundant, right? That's on purpose. It's because he super wants you to be paying attention to this. Why? Well, because greed is sneaky. And if you aren't intentional, you will accidentally buy into the lie of greed, that we need to be rich in stuff. And I think this is so pivotal for us because I think on paper, a lot of people who say they're followers of Jesus or believers, they'd be like, yeah, I know. Life isn't about toys. You never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul, yada, yada. I get all that. But I think in practice, we aren't on guard against it. And greed ends up finding its way into our hearts in powerful and subversive ways. So I think we would do well to not just agree with Jesus, yes, greed is wrong, but also to listen to him and to put up our guard against it. I think this is especially important in a country and in a county as affluent and successful as our own. Okay? But then Jesus responds to the guy, and then he cranks up the pressure by telling them a parable. Okay, he's going to turn and tell a parable. Now let's remember what a parable is. A parable is a story with a deeper meaning. That's basically what a parable is, a story with a deeper meaning. And it's a method of teaching that is basically synonymous with Jesus as a great teacher because he uses this method so often. And why does he tell this particular parable? Well, he does it to paint a picture of how a person would live when they believe the lie. If they believe the lie that the good life is to be rich in stuff, and then this story is how they will live their life. And it's actually going to complete the chart that we've begun, okay? We said greed says the good life is to be rich in stuff. This parable vividly demonstrates what you would do, what you need to do in order to become rich in stuff. And it's pretty straightforward. All you need to do is get it all for yourself. If you're going to be rich in stuff, greed says, how do you get the good life? You got to get it all for yourself, which is pretty obvious, right? If stuff equals happiness, then get more stuff. And the parable is about a guy who is all in on greed's version of the good life. In fact, I'd like to give you a profile of parable guy. Okay, earlier we had a profile of crowd guy. Here's the profile that I think we could see of parable guy. Okay, here's what we know about him. Let's look at him side by side. They're pretty similar. Okay, I think you could say they're identical. Once again, this story is for everybody, but it's about somebody, okay? It's about crowd guy. So here we go. Let's learn how not to think about money from parable guy. Here we go, verse 16 through 19. Here's what he says. He told them a parable, saying, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, oh, well, what shall I do? I have nowhere to store all of my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns, and I will build larger ones. And there I will store all of my grain and all my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. So relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Okay, what's happening here? Well, parable guy, he gets a huge crop. He already has barns. He wants bigger barns. So he builds them. He has so much that he can retire in style. Okay, this is the agricultural equivalent of like a tech bro CEO who sells his startup for like $2 billion and a bunch of shares on top, okay? This is a major financial win. In fact, if I didn't know that Jesus was about to give a negative example, I'd be thinking, hashtag bless up, bro. Like, get me on this plan. This sounds pretty good. And the crowd would be saying like, shoot, that's awesome. Bigger barns, let's go. And again, if we could snap our fingers, if we're honest, I think we'd be like, I'll take it. It sounds pretty good. But what does that reveal? I think what it reveals about them and us is that we tend to believe that the good life is to be rich in stuff. Jesus warned us, hey, be on your guard. I'm telling you, greed is sneaky. And here we are in the middle of a story that, spoiler, is not going to end well for parable guy. And I'm still kind of thinking like, sign me up. I'll take it. We have to be on our guard. Jesus is setting us up to be a little jealous of his finances. But as he tells the story, he gives us some pretty clear signs that homie's attitude is not good. Okay, look again at the story and about how this guy talks. Okay, he said to himself, what shall I do? I have nowhere to store my crops. He said, I will do this. I will tear down my barn. I will build large ones. I will store my grain for my goods. And I will say to my soul, so you. Like, literally about a dozen times, he uses a personal pronoun in like 2 sentences. Okay, there is zero team. There's zero thought of others. I mean, based on how he's talking, you think that he personally harvested all of his food and actually built all of his barns by himself by hand. That's how this guy talks. And here's another reason that we know that this guy is not doing well. He thinks he's the reason he has such a big crop. But look at how Jesus actually told the story. He said, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. The land. In other words, it does not say a really innovative farmer using groundbreaking techniques used the soil in a unique way in order to produce a 200-fold yield. You know, like, that's not what it says. It just says the land did it. In other words, God blessed him. But do you get a sense of gratitude from homeboy? No, you don't. And to top it all off, and this would be easy for us to miss, I think, in our context, but for them, according to God's law that they're living under at the time, landowners were supposed to leave a certain part of their field unharvested. AKA, they were commanded to not maximize their crop's yield. Why? Well, as an act of charity. They left them unharvested for the poor to be able to access them for free. Whenever a landowner was blessed by God to have a field that grew anything at all, they were to acknowledge God's blessing by blessing others with what they had been given. And this guy makes no mention of doing that. He is all about maximum profit. And I think we can, by reading this, rest the case. He's a jerk. Okay, he's presented to us as a living illustration of how not to function in our relationship to money. And so look how God responds to him in verse 20. God said to him, "Fool, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?" He's called a fool by God, and then he's dead. Okay, his life is required of him, his money is gone, and just like that, all that he has came to nothing. Nobody is there to care. His wealth is worthless. I might have started off jealous of Parable Guy, but all of a sudden, not so much, right? Jesus ends the parable with this single line of commentary in verse 21. He says, "So is the one. So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." Let's look at that sentence piece by piece. I think it's Jesus' answer to the two big questions about the good life. Look closely. He says, it's a warning. He says, so is the one. He's like, hey, if you want what this guy got, if you want to die a fool's death, go ahead. Lay up treasure for yourself. That's what you ought to do if you want what this guy got. But if you'd like the good life, you're going to need to do the opposite of what this guy did. What did he do? He was not rich toward God. So, that's exactly what you need to be. According to Jesus, the good life is to be rich toward God. Not to be rich in stuff, it's to be rich toward God. Jesus is combating the lie of greed with the truth. He's saying those who are not rich toward God, they have a very predictable end. It's not a good life. Their wealth is worthless. Their legacy is selfishness. And if you'd like to avoid this disastrous outcome, then be rich toward God. Which leads us to the second big question. If being rich toward God is the good life, then how do I get it? Well, greed's answer is that we saw it in the guy's life, that you need to lay up treasure for yourself. Get it all for yourself. Eat, drink, and be merry. And so the correct answer, of course, must be the opposite of that. It must be not to get it all for myself, but to give it all to Jesus. Give it all to Jesus. All of my money, all of my opportunities, everything that I have is to be given over in service to Jesus. When I do that, He provides me with the good life. Being rich toward God provides the benefits of all of God's blessing, which sometimes comes in material form. Other times, it does not. But regardless, it does not end in misery and shame surrounded by selfishness and petty trophies. The good life is to be rich toward God. We get there by giving it all to Jesus. You will never outgive God when you are rich toward Him. Because when you're rich toward Him, you're living in alignment with the design of the guy who made the universe. He already owns it all. How could that not be a better life? To be rich toward God. So I want to step back and just see what we've seen kind of as we walked over this passage. What does the scene show us about money, about our view of it? I would say that this brief exchange between Jesus and crowd guy, in it, Jesus is profoundly identifying what our human sort of default view of money tends to be. Okay, if we aren't careful, this is what we will natively believe about money. Okay, here's what we would say. Who made it? When it comes to money, who made it? We would say, me. Me. Who made it? Me. Of course it was me. I went to work, I did the things, and it's in my bank account. It's me. So who owns it? Me. Again, my bank account has my name on it, so my money is mine. Who controls it? Me. Unless you hack me, but still, me, right? I control my money. Who benefits from it? Me. I've got beneficiaries on my account, and it's me. Okay? Who made it? Me. Who owns it? Me. Who controls it? Me. Who benefits? Me. Everything about money is about me. Why? Well, because the good life is to be rich in stuff. But Jesus is reorienting our whole worldview. Okay? He wants us to think differently. What would he say? The good life is to be rich toward God. We get the good life by giving our all to Jesus. And if that's true, it changes everything. All of our answers are different. So when we ask the question, who made it? Not me. God made it through me. He is the one who provides. The ground produces the crop, not the farmer. We need to see that God makes the money through me. Well, then who owns it? God has given it to me. Again, we think my bank account, my money. The truth is, God made it. He owns it. I steward it. God has given this money to me in order to manage it in a way that honors him. So then who controls it? Well, God within me, his Spirit within me. I want to be obedient to him. I'm giving my all already to him. I want him to guide me, of course, in my decision-making about money. God through me. Well, then who benefits from it? Others around me. Others around me. What we've been given in financial blessing is a chance to, yes, meet our own needs, but also to bless and serve others. We are those who don't fully maximize personal profits for ourselves in order to benefit others. And this is a complete reversal. I mean, honestly, it's shocking if you think about how opposite our default view is versus what Jesus tells us. Because I'm going to argue what it comes down to is that Jesus views the purpose of money completely differently than we do. What is the purpose of money? Well, we tend to think, if we follow our hearts, if we're seduced by greed, here's what we think money's purpose is. Money's purpose is a way to deliver what we hope for. That's what money's for. It's a way to deliver what we hope for. Its whole job is to provide me with the things that I want. If I just have enough money, we say, then at some point in the future, everything will be just like I want. It's the silver bullet solution to deliver us all of our hopes and dreams. But Jesus sees the purpose of money totally differently. It's not a way to deliver what we hope for. It's a way to discern what we hope in. Money is a way to discern what we hope in. He uses money, Jesus does, and our constant interactions with it as a chance to check and see what's true of our hearts. He uses it like a dipstick in our soul. Where is our hope? Where is our security, our joy, our confidence? For God, money is just a means to test our hearts. I know it's a test that I frequently don't like the results of. I think you can agree that how I'm doing financially, it has a profound impact, right, on my stress, on my mood, my outlook on life. And that's why it's such an effective measuring tool, because that's exactly how God views it. Money, for him, is nothing more than a means of discerning what we hope in. So let's step back and review. What are we seeing? Jesus and greed are having a face-off here. We saw very different pictures of the good life. To be rich in stuff versus being rich toward God. Very different pictures of what money's purpose is supposed to be. But if we want a life different than crowd guy and parable guy, then we need to be rich toward God. But I think I've been here long enough, I know my audience well enough to know that you've got some questions, and they're valid. You've got some pushback, or at least I would. Okay, maybe you are by profession literally a financial planner. Okay, or maybe you're not and you're just a financial prepper, which is different, by the way. Those are different. That's a personality thing. But anyway, if maybe you're into that and you're like, honestly, that guy's plan from the parable, like that's a pretty good one. Smart money says you got to save big. Okay? And maybe you're a little more skeptical, and again, this might be thinking about, like, oh yeah, sure, yeah, give your all to Jesus. Right. That's a really cool thing there, preacher. But I'm going to guess you still have a retirement plan, huh? Okay. So what are you really talking about here? What do you mean? That's fair pushback. Okay. So I want to clarify a couple of things, because you might be hearing me say, you can't have money. You can't have a retirement account. You can't have nice things. Give all your money to the church, or you're doing it wrong. Right? No. Okay. It's not what I'm saying, and more importantly, it's not what Jesus is saying, okay? Jesus talks about financial blessing as a good thing, actually, a lot. He's not bashing wealth or wise financial practices. No, Jesus in this moment is correcting a particular person for their particularly selfish perspective on money, a perspective we tend to have as well. And so here's kind of the bigger biblical picture if we want to break it down, okay? You can have money. You can have money. Money is a blessing. Don't feel bad. You can even have a lot of money. You can have it. You can't love money. You can have money. You can't love money. Loving money is greed. It's a problem. Greed is believing that life consists in the abundance of possessions. You can have money. You can't love it. Another way to say it would be you can save money. In fact, that's good. We'll talk about that more in just a moment. You can save money. You can't serve money. If you think about the parable, the problem for Parable Guy was not that he had barns. It's not even that he built bigger barns. The problem was that in the whole story, he never even acknowledges God or blesses anyone else at any point with the blessings that he's been entrusted with. It's his selfishness, not his saving, that's being condemned. You can have money, you can't love it. You can save money, you can't serve it. The guy in the parable thought his barns were the safest place for protecting his assets. Money was a means to deliver for him what he hoped for. But what he didn't know was that God saw money as a means to discern what he was hoping in, and what it revealed about his heart wasn't good. He believed that his money was his, and that he controlled it, and that he should benefit from it. And what's condemned or rebuked is his selfishness. I love how St. Augustine said this, okay? He's speaking of the guy in the parable. He did not realize that the bellies of the poor were much safer storerooms than his barns. The bellies of the poor were much safer storerooms than his barns. He believed his barns were the safer place for his investments, safer than helping the people around him, but he was dead wrong about it, literally. The safer place to invest, the better ROI for him would have been in generosity. And so if we step back at the bigger biblical worldview, go ahead, build barns, make them huge. But don't forget, how you use your money is God's gauge on how you view him and others. And if we're not using our money in a way that honors him and that benefits others, we have a problem in our relationship with money. If this guy, same situation, if he had merely been generous, it would have shown his heart was devoted to the Lord in the midst of extreme blessing. You can save money. You can't serve it. And so, okay, let me end on this. You might be saying, fine, okay, but seriously, like, what do I do? Based on what you're saying, do I save? Do I spend? Do I give it all away? Do I keep money? Like, what do I do with the actual dollars that I have? Okay, this is not very practical right now. I understand that. And to be honest, in a room this size, the best we can ever really do, biblically speaking, is just to provide principles. And so I want to close with two quick principles that I hope will help guide us as we think particularly about saving. But before I do, I want to invite you to our Good Stewards workshop, okay? Next Friday, not this coming Friday, but next week's Friday and Saturday. You can read more about this on the website, Good Stewards Workshop. Biblical basis for generosity, lots of very practical stuff about how to save and how to spend and how much to use and all that kind of stuff from an actual professional financial planner that is not me. More info from that on our website. If you're looking for nitty-gritty, that would be a great place to go to get it. Sign up for that on our website. It's for next Friday and Saturday. But here are the two principles that I want us to keep in mind, big picture, as we close. I'd say it this way. I took some of these thoughts and rearranged them from Tim Keller. I found them helpful. Here's the first one. Since there is a physical world, it would be foolish to not save at all. When it comes to money, since there is a physical world, it would be foolish not to save at all. To save 0% of the money that we have for the future, that's not good, okay? Jesus is not saying don't invest. We do live in a physical world, like with bodies that have needs and bills and children and college and taxes and all kinds of responsibilities financially. It's good to save. Securing your own financial future is actually a means of blessing others, especially if you have anyone else in your life dependent on you. We live in a physical world. It's real. It would be foolish to not save anything at all. But also, since there is a spiritual world, it would be foolish to save it all. Since there's a physical world, it would be foolish to save 0%. But since there's a spiritual world, it would be foolish to save 100%, to only be used for you and your own purposes. That would be incredibly foolish. There is a world, a life beyond this world. There's something bigger going on. And we need to use our money in a way that keeps in tension the idea that, yes, there is a physical world of needs and desires and fun and retirement and bills and college and ice cream. That's great, okay? But there's also something more than this world. And God has given us, particularly in America and in Annapolis, in this county, incredible access to wealth, literally like no other people in human history. Literally unlike almost anyone else in this planet right now. And money is a gauge that reveals what we hope in. And if our money 100% benefits ourselves or secures exclusively some future for me and mine where I kick back and I'm finally happy because all my accounts are full, Jesus says, you're a fool. Since there's a spiritual world, we would be foolish to keep it all to ourselves. The good life is not to be rich in stuff. It's to be rich toward God. And the way that we secure the good life is not to get it all for myself. No, it's to give it all to Jesus. Money, it's not a means of securing my future, a means of getting what I hope for. It's a gauge. Our hope for the future has always been and will always be Jesus. Let me pray for us. Father, let us be rich toward you. You, though you were rich, you sent your Son, became poor, so that through his humble poverty we might become rich. He laid aside the glory, took on humanity, and has offered to us a relationship with you, an inheritance that is incorruptible, undefiled, reserved in heaven for us. I pray that we would live for that inheritance more than just for this life. Help us to be wise, live in the tension, and steward what you've given us well. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks so much for being here, guys. We will see you next week as we continue in Luke.